We are going to call this meeting to order now. It is 7:03 p.m. on December 15th, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Structural Oversight. If the Spanish language interpreters, Thalia and Luisa, can please give the information on Spanish language interpretation now, that would be most helpful.
Muy buenas noches a todos. Vamos a empezar esta reunión. Son las 7:03 de la noche del día 15 de diciembre. Esta es una reunión, de la Comisión de la Policía, de la Accountabilidad, y esta reunión va a ser grabada y va a tener interpretación en español.
Thank you so very much. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Susan and Andrea. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. Finally, the closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. But please note that this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to the City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings and agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I would like to thank you so much for stop sharing and turn the meeting over to the co-chair for the land acknowledgement. Faith, we can't hear you.
Okay. I'm wondering if, Samir, would you mind giving the land acknowledgement? I am
Not at all.
getting myself connected. Thank you.
The Police Accountability Commission currently uses the land acknowledgement, which is on display at City Hall, which is, we acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So we are going to move into our community agreements. If we can have that shared, pretty please. All of these agreements are important. And I would like for us to highlight today, always confront oppression. That is the center of the work that you are doing in this committee. So I'm going to give you time to read this, and then I will ask next to the next frame. We can move to the next frame, please. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meetings? And to gently calling in our colleagues and collaborators if needed? May I have a thumbs up or a waved fingers in agreement? Thank you so very much. Okay, our next step is to review the PAC timeline. I'm wondering if staff is going to do that, or is Co-Chair Faith going to do that?
Not sure if Co-Chair Faith's audio is working, so I can get started, and if it does start working, just jump right on in and interrupt me. This meeting is part of the PAC's powers and duties phase of work. It is expected to go into January and will end when all three of this phase's outcome documents are approved. This is the first of several phases in which the PAC will directly begin deciding what will go into the recommendations that the PAC will send to City Council for a new police accountability system, including the new Oversight Board. This phase focuses on the functions of the new system. Future phases of work will develop the form of the new system, as well as how it relates to the rest of the city government and the transition from our current system to the new one. The commission will present all proposed changes to the City Council in 2023 for their consideration and approval. I think I'll pass it back to Co-Chair Faith here.
Maybe not.
No problem. I think she's reconnecting. Sorry.
Okay.
So this slide shows the current project plan for the powers and duties phase of work. It's going to be updated as needed, and this slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase. Today's meeting is in the gold box with the red border near the bottom of the screen. And following today, here are the next few meetings of the PAC. So the Subcommittee on Officer Accountability meets next Monday, December 19th. The Subcommittee on Access to Information meet on December 29th. There's no meetings on from December 20th through 28th. And the full commission, as well as this subcommittee, will each have their next meetings in January. Yeah, I guess now I'll try passing it over to Co-Chair Faith if that works for you. Yeah.
Thank you for your patience, everyone, and apologies about my technical difficulties. Welcome, Casey. Yes, so want to go over the upcoming meetings and events. So upcoming next is Monday, December 19th from 7 to 9 p.m. The Subcommittee on Officer Accountability will be a Zoom meeting. We will have a break from meetings December 20th through 28th. Thursday, December 29th, we will be back with the Subcommittee on Access to Information. No meetings on January 2nd. And then in the swing of things, we'll be back on Thursday, January 5th for the Subcommittee on Access to Information again. On the 9th with the Subcommittee on Officer Accountability. And then January 12th, this Subcommittee on Structural Oversight will be back together again.
Thank you so much. Would you like to continue on?
Yeah, this evening, we want to give a warm welcome to Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to have an opportunity to hear a little bit on Commissioner Hardesty's thoughts around structural oversight. We will have time for a member question and answer with the commissioner. An important note is we do have fellow commissioner colleagues here who are more than welcome to ask questions, even if they're not on the subcommittee. We will also have time for public comment to be able to ask questions. And then following conversation with Commissioner Hardesty, we will have time to discuss the draft that we are working on around structural oversight. And finally, we will conclude with public comment.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Commissioner Faith. We'd like to begin our briefing with Commissioner Hardesty. Welcome in. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Let me start by saying thank you for the invitation. It is absolutely my pleasure to have this be one of my last duties at City Hall. I will remind you that the tasks that you have taken on, you have the hope and dreams of the next generation of Portlanders that are trusting that we will build a police force that will be just and fair, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of race, and regardless of what part of the city we live in. We are a long way from that. And what you have been tasked with, what 82% of Portland voters asked you to do, is to put in place an oversight of our public safety police officers that would be fair and just and accountable to the people that our police force is sworn to protect and serve. That is a huge responsibility, and it is not something that we've ever had in the history of policing in the city of Portland. So I want to just start by centering the enormous task that we have tasked you with completing. I also want to caution you, like I do every time I speak to you, about overreaching and taking on more than the voters have tasked you with accomplishing. You have been given a timeline. You have been given really clear directions from voters, 82% of them, by the way, on what they want you to do. And I have looked at material that you have sent me, and some of it is on your plate, and some of it is not your business. And I'm saying that with love, and I'm saying it with kindness, because I don't want you wasting your time taking on work that is not constitutionally mandated. When I looked at the work that this subcommittee has taken on, I think this is an agenda for a lot of different organizations that have been working on these issues for a long time. That is not this commission. This commission was put together to develop what I hope will be a unanimous recommendation to a very different city council on an accountable oversight system that will hold police officers accountable for how they interact with the public. And so I want to start there. And I'm happy to answer any questions and take any pushback. And I'm happy to go through the individual questions. But as I went through some of the work that the subcommittee has identified, it is not the work of this Police Accountability Commission. I also want to encourage you to use your full title. You are not a PAC. You are the Police Accountability Commission that voters wanted to create a new system that they could trust, and honestly, that the police can trust. No one trusts the current system that we have, and your job is to create a system that nobody will think is perfect, but everybody will trust that it will be transparent, it will be independent, and it will actually provide the discipline necessary based on the criteria from the investigation of the investigators who will do the hard work of actually investigating misconduct claims. So I think some of your committee members may have a misperception of what they can accomplish in the time period that you've been given and what your task is. And so again, I'm happy to stop, take any questions. But as I looked at what you've decided on, half of your list are not things that are your business or your charge.
Questions?
Now's the time.
Right. I'll be glad.
It's now or never. Anyone on this committee, and let me say, Commissioner Debbie Iona and I go back decades. Commissioner Dan Handelman and I go back decades. And those of you who have seen me at City Hall, you know that I'm a straight shooter. I'm not gonna pat you on the head and tell you what a great job you're doing, if in fact you're not doing the job we've charged you with doing. And so I'm ready to take it, and I want your pushback. But now's the time to have this real conversation about what are you doing, and when will you be done, and when will you have a recommendation for this brand new, very conservative city council?
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Debbie.
So
Hi,
my internet's
Commissioner.
not working great. So
Good to see you.
hopefully, good to see you too. Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.
Can you be a little bit more specific about where we're straying?
Oh, I am so
Couple
happy to do
examples.
that. I am very happy to do that. So yes, I'm happy to do that. Hang on for a sec. Let me get my notes. And so, for example, you have no business actually looking at Portland Police Bureau's budget. That's not your business. Why it's on your agenda, I have no idea. You have no ability and no charge to actually influence federal or state law. What else? Collective bargaining. That is not your business. That is not the charge of this committee. And why it would be on your agenda makes no sense to me. So that's just off the top. I can give you more, right? But as I look at this, and as I look at the ballot measure that created this Police Accountability Commission, there's a disconnect between what we asked you to do and the work you've taken on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Faith.
Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. I was at our last city council briefing and definitely heard your pushback around our scope and our scope creep. So it is a good reminder. I think it is a very hard job to balance creating something that is politically tenable with a new city council and wanting to be as detailed as possible for all of the questions that come, like did you consider this? Did you consider that? I think of charter reform and charter council and how well they were able to really defend their work.
Yes.
So I'm curious if you have any, I think that your invitation to reconsider what we're looking at is well said, and we'll definitely take that on. Debbie and I were talking about budget and what that looks like. So we hear you. But if you have any thoughts around how we kind of hold the balance between something that is so important to all of us and wanting to be thoughtful and detailed when we get to the point of bringing it to city council, and also, you know, a need for speed to get this done. I'm curious your thoughts around that.
Yeah, really, thank you for that question, because I do have some ideas about how you address the current political realities that you're operating in and how you set up this new oversight board to, over the long haul, be able to do all the other stuff that other people want you to do. The reality is that I see nothing about creating subcommittees that will actually do community engagement processes around other policy issues, right? I'm not saying that there's any bad ideas on your list. I'm just saying you are not the people to do it. Your job is to create a oversight board based on the criteria of the ballot measure, and make sure that that oversight board is squeaky clean, that the investigators that you hire are real investigators, and you make sure that you develop a job description and a process that doesn't allow other people to dump incompetent investigators onto this new body, right? You want to make sure there is a public process so that the investigators are community investigators and not investigators inherited by a failed system, right? I mean, that's where I would be spending my energy. I would be thinking about, what does a subcommittee look like, right? What are the national studies that you can do, because the new board will have a budget to be able to actually talk about and do national data collection around accountability measures, right? So I believe your job is to make sure that the structure you put in place is defendable. And every member of this commission can do just like the Charter Commission did. I was appalled that the recommendations from the Charter Commission was being undermined by members of the City Council. And the Charter Commission wasn't even something that was supposed to be controversial until some people saw what they recommended and didn't like it, right? And so for you, you know what you're going to put together is going to be pushback, it's going to be challenged. And the questions are going to be, is it balanced? Is it fair? Do the police think it's fair, right? Because I can tell you today, the police don't think any system we have is fair and actually treats all police officers the same. You are the only people with the opportunity to continue down this path of having a police force that will be transparent, that will have to answer to the community that they are sworn to protect and serve. And if you get sidetracked by all these other things that people have wanted to do for decades and have not been able to do, then you're going to miss your deadlines. You're going to annoy Judge Simon, who is already annoyed with the city of Portland. And when we go back on February 28th, he is not going to be in the mood to be extending deadlines for people who have not done the work they've been tasked to do. He's put the city of Portland on notice. He's put the police union on notice. And I think you will have to make sure that you're on the right path to give the city a defensible proposal that then gets implemented. And I see a few more hands are up.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to invite in staff, and then I want to invite in Commissioner Dan.
I'm happy to defer to Commissioner Dan actually first.
Okay.
Hi, Commissioner Dan.
Yes. Good evening. Can you hear me?
I can. Good evening.
Great. Okay. Hi. Sorry, I don't have my camera tonight. I was not expecting to be participating in the meeting. I'm glad I'm able to. This is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a commissioner. And as you know, I'm a member of Court and Cop Watch. I'm not a member of this particular subcommittee. I think, Commissioner Hardesty, first of all, I don't know what the right term is, but congratulations on your 4 years, I guess is the best thing to say. I watched the council yesterday morning giving great praise for all the work that you did. And I'm listening to what you're saying. I understand, I think what you're trying to get at, but I think if you look carefully at the documents that you received from the commission, the things about state law and the collective bargaining agreement is like, there's like a bin of items that we're running into that we can't change. We know we can't change. So we're going to make a list of those and present those to council at the end that say, you know, in order for this commission the new board to work properly, you need to look at these state laws and you need to look at this part of the police contract, because otherwise we're going to create something that won't work. So we're going to need the help of city council and these other bodies to do those outlines. The only other place where the police budget and the contract come up are in things that we think that the board might want to do, that I think the community would want them to do. And these are things we found in our research that happen in other cities, where they have a member of a police oversight board that sits in on contract negotiations in Seattle. I think that would be valuable.
Again, those are great ideas. And it would be a great idea to, nothing, excuse me, Commissioner Dan, nothing that's being proposed is a bad idea. What I'm trying to get you to do is stay focused on what your very narrow mission is. And because the oversight board will exist forever, they get to do all that work. So if they find out that there's other state laws, you may remember, we had to change state law after the ballot measure passed, just to enable a community oversight board to do direct discipline, right? Period. So it will be this community oversight board we put together that will be the decision maker, period, right? So that's radically different. What I see happening with this list is trying to address all the issues that you and I have worked on for 30 years and other community members like Commissioner Debbie have worked on for the last 30 or 40 years. They're not, and they still are worthy. It's just not your charge at this time. Your charge is, what does a community oversight board look like? And how do you make sure that it is a fair and just board that is not overly penalizing police? They're using best practices and they're putting in place best practices. So we have the resources to hire really good people. And I would say everything depends on the policy that you give to the city council about how we make that happen. So Dan, you and I don't disagree on any of the big policy decisions that we've worked on, policy recommendations, but your job in putting the oversight board together is not to fix that. Your job is just to put the oversight process in place so that the oversight board can continue that work. Is that clear?
I don't think we disagree on that point at all.
Okay.
What I'm concerned about is, you recall in the year 2000 when we worked on a plan for an oversight board much like this one, and it
Yes.
got thrown out. We got the IPR, and they
Yes.
said, "Oh, we'll revisit this in 1 year and see what we can
Yes.
do to fix it up." And it took
Yes.
7 years before anybody looked at it again. So what
But
we're trying to do is
then the
make
city
sure that
council,
the board set up.
No.
Excuse me, I'm in the middle of talking. So what we're looking for is to make sure that this board, when it gets set up, has all the authority that it needs in the city code to do what you and the people who wrote this ballot measure envision them to do. So we don't want to come back to it in 8 years after it gets put into place. We want to make sure it gets set up at the beginning to do what you wanted it to do. So
Yes.
that's the way I'm seeing the work that we're doing now. And I really appreciate that you got this started so that we can make sure we have a good review board. Thank you very much.
you are very welcome. And let me be clear. The city council cannot change the charge of the oversight board that you put in place. Only the vote of the people of the city of Portland can make that change. So again, there's a lot of things that if you, I, and Commissioner Debbie had our way and we got to rewrite city code, that we would do overnight. This is not that process. What we're putting together is the policy for the oversight board that will then continue to work on these fundamental systemic issues that you, I, and Commissioner Debbie and others have worked on for decades, right? That's what your job is. But your job isn't to point out every reason why this board will fail. Your job is to actually make sure we're going to put the right policy in place so we get the right volunteers to come and actually do the work of continuing all this other stuff that has to happen. I will tell you what will happen if you put everything that you want and this very first thing that goes to this very conservative council, they will vote it down. They will slow it down. They will find fault because you have overstepped what you have been authorized to do.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarity here. And I'm going to ask us to take a big deep breath. Collectively.
And just so you know, Dan Handelman and I talk like that all the time.
Oh,
We're
no,
not
no,
mad at each
that's
other. We
okay.
love each other.
No, I know
This
you
is
do.
true. This is true.
The passion, I can feel
Yes,
the
yes,
passion.
yes.
I absolutely feel the passion. And I want to be able to bring in other voices as we're having this conversation. And the word I want to highlight here, I think, Commissioner Hardesty, is policy.
Yes.
Policy for an oversight board. And so
Yes.
now I would like staff to step in, and then I will go to Commissioner Casey. Staff?
Thank you, Dr. Moses. So for anyone who's watching along, one of the primary focuses under the charter text is the development of an accountability system that deals with administrative misconduct allegations, and developing a new workflow for that is probably the most well-known of the mandated duties of the commission. There is another subcommittee that is focused exclusively on that. Actually, we have both the co-chairs of that subcommittee are here with us today, Dan being one of them and Commissioner Charlie the other. And that's meeting next Monday. So there'll be a lot more depth into that side of the operation in those meetings, and folks can follow along at the subcommittee on officer accountability. I did want to ask, because with relation to the policy side, the charter does talk about the authority to make policy and directive recommendations to the Portland Police Bureau, as well as the City Council, and there's some special things. There's some unique changes there. And as this subcommittee works on developing how those policies are going to be developed and then transmitted, in the obligation to respond component of it, wondered if perhaps Commissioner Hardesty could give, if you have advice on how you think the oversight board should go about those types of things.
Yeah, and you're right. The ballot measure is very clear about the oversight board being able to recommend policy. And I would say you want to make sure that what you present to the council will make sure that you are presenting that policy recommendations directly to the city council, right? You will inform the police bureau, but your relationship is with the city council. The board's relationship is with the city council, and not with the police bureau. The oversight board is an independent entity that voters have put together to provide oversight of policing. So your job is to give it to the city council. City council's job is to make sure that the police respond. And let me be clear, because we all know if there's a response that's necessary, you need to put a timeline in there. And I think once a decision has been made, a 15-day window for the police chief to affirm that they have received and have acted on the committee's mandate would be more than enough time. The committee may say 30 days. I think the problem now is that it takes way too long, both from the officer's perspective and from the community's perspective, for us to get a definitive decision on discipline. And I would highly recommend that the timeline for actually the decision being made and being publicized be very short.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. Commissioner Casey, welcome in.
Thank you very much. And apologies, as the new person, I feel like the guy who's walking into the middle of the conversation that's already going on at a party and being like, hey guys, what's going on? So I hope everybody will indulge me as I try to kind of get myself caught up. So just to try to kind of process what I'm hearing from you, Commissioner Hardesty, and try to make sure that what I am hearing is actually what you're trying to say. What I'm sort of understanding is that the charge that you'd like to see us really focusing on is not telling this new board, here's all the things that you need to change once you exist, but rather creating the board in such a form that it's going to be capable of making all of those changes. So basically, instead of saying you need to do this, that, and the other thing, we're supposed to be putting a structure together that is strong enough that once they get into place, they will have the knowledge and the independence and just sort of the, strength of system that they can then say, okay, here are the policy changes that we need to make. Does that?
That is absolutely right. Yes, yes. Because again, I know exactly. I know that the goal of that ballot measure is to create a process whereby police accountability will be fair, consistent. When we did the last contract, I voted for it because it gave us a clear discipline guide for the very first time in the 30 plus years I've been working on police accountability in the city of Portland, for the very first time. And so you cannot say, well, this officer is officer so-and-so, and because they're friends with officer so-and-so, they won't be disciplined. It will be consistent. And that's why it's so key that you, as the commissioners putting the board together, are really looking at it from both perspectives. Will officers believe that these investigators are going to treat them fairly? Well, the community believe if they put in a complaint, it will be truly investigated, right? Back to the core of why this commission exists. It exists for you to create a system that has never existed in the city of Portland before, one that is fair, just, and accountable to both police and the community they're sworn to protect and serve.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Faith.
Thank you, Casey, Commissioner Casey. I truly think that you maybe explained it better than I could as someone who's been here for over a year. So your reframing was really helpful. I think I'm having a little bit, particularly around, so the work of this subcommittee on structural oversight, I'm having a hard time like with the meta conversation around developing a container for policy versus us making.
So you're not making any policy decisions other than what is the structure under which police accountability will happen in the city of Portland. Your job today is not to develop any policy other than the policy around the accountability system, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so maybe I'm gonna just, will the subcommittee indulge me? I'm gonna give an example of one of the things that we've been thinking through, and maybe this reframing would be helpful for other people's brains.
Okay.
I hear you, Commissioner Hardesty, on the conversation of budget. And one of the things that we've talked about is like a recommendation that the new oversight board, that a member of the oversight board sits on the budget advisory committee for PPB. Like it would be helpful for them to participate in the community engagement process as the budget is developed for the Bureau. And as you and Commissioner Casey have so well defined, I'm now like, well, where does that sit? And is that just like none of our business to make that recommendation now?
At this point, I would say, yeah, it's really, because honestly, in the last 3 budget cycles, I learned 24 hours before the mayor's proposed budget was released. So just because somebody's on a budget committee doesn't necessarily mean that they will have any impact on the mayor's budget. It makes much more sense for me for the Police Oversight Board to create their own subcommittee that will review the police budget and make recommendations during the budget process, right? But again, that's why it's not your job to figure out how that happens. Your job is to figure out who are the people who are the folks that need to be around that table to actually be able to set up these systems so that the public gets what they need, right? That's what we've hired you to do. And what you're trying to do is answer the question, what is the policy that we should move forward? That's not, people will have time to do that, right? Your job is to put the structure in place, and a structure that the public and the police will think is fair, just, and transparent.
Thank you both for those questions and answers, Commissioner Debbie, and then staff.
So Commissioner Hardesty, when you were envisioning this new system, what did you think would happen with the current police review board?
Well, what I thought was one of your recommendations would be, what is the appeal process, right? Because what we know is the current police review board is useless and overrepresented by police. And whether it was the OIR group or whether it was the DOJ, everybody said this is really not a representative group, right? And you may remember the city council tried to slip through what they were pretending was a administrative change that would have actually changed the makeup of that review board. So what I hope will come out of your work is what is the review process? And I would say if the community is the decision maker, whatever review process should be overrepresented by community members and not overrepresented by the police union or police officers.
Thank you so much, staff, and then Commissioner Casey.
Yeah, so that item is definitely on the agenda of the other subcommittee and may be helpful to know here too, because we have you here, Commissioner Hardesty. We want to hear your opinion on everything and not just the subcommittee. I did want to mention that the commission very early on discussed whether or not it would be helpful to start by figuring out how the new oversight board is structured or how the structure goes about doing things. And there was a form function sort of distinction, and either way it leads to some conversations that feel cart before the horse. There's no way around that to know the before or the after. So the commission in their agenda and scope put the function side first, and then figured out determining sort of next what the form would be that would be necessary to create the function. So this phase of work is the function, and then the next will be how big is the oversight board and all of that. And so I think that might be helpful to have a conversation about as well in that later stage, because it's going to be really important to try and be cognizant that there is a little bit of cart before the horse if you talk about the function. You can say, well, we don't know how it's going to be structured. How do we figure this out? But if you talk about the form, well, we don't know what we're setting this thing up to do yet. So there's a little bit of back and forth there.
I appreciate that, but let me do it this way. I'm a community member that has had a bad experience. I need you to tell me, who do I complain to? What is the process? How can you assure me that the process will treat me fairly and won't disregard me because of my skin color, because I'm homeless, because I don't live in the Southwest Hills? How can you assure me that you will actually respect my complaint and actually give me a process that will actually be my, that I can trust? That will actually effectively do an investigation and then come to a conclusion. And then if in fact the officer did something inappropriate, they would be held accountable, right? So for me, that's what I want you to do. I want you to be able to tell me as a community member that's filed complaints with IPR and been told, oh, I'm sorry, you don't have an address, we can't actually investigate. Oh, I'm sorry, it was a mass protest, we don't investigate those, right? So why would I trust any system that is supposed to hold police officers accountable if my previous experience, I've been blown off?
Yes, thank you so much, Commissioner Hardesty. And again, that's another part of our commission, we've broken people off into different groups. And so that's another one of the subcommittees here that they're.
Well, let me just say that I hope the subcommittees are talking to each other, because at the end of the day, you're gonna have to walk the city council through what does it look like for a police officer going through this system? And what does it look like for a community member going through this system? And why is what you're proposing better than what we have today? And if you cannot answer that question very clearly and very concisely, then you have failed in the mission that we have given you.
Thank you for that clarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Casey.
Thank you. To get into sort of the policy specific really quickly, because I'm very interested to hear what Commissioner Hardesty's take on this is. What do you see the role of this commission being in terms of ensuring independence from the city for the new board? Particularly what I'm thinking of is a concern that I've heard from a number of community members is the feeling that a lot of our independent organizations that we set up end up all receiving legal advice from the Portland City Attorney's Office, who sort of have their own interests that they are representing. And so do you think it would be appropriate, as we kind of set up the structure of this, to say one of the things that is important to us is that this board have access or resources for sort of receiving independent legal advice, or creating some sort of firewall between the board and sort of other city organizations that may have their own agendas? Or do you think that sort of goes afield of what we should be doing in this commission as well?
Actually, that is the core reason that this new oversight commission will exist, is that it is absolutely totally independent of the city of Portland and political manipulation. This is why we intentionally put a funding source into the ballot measure. This is why we intentionally made sure that no police officer or police officer family member could actually serve on the committee. This is why it has to have geographic representation that will prioritize people who have had lived experience interacting with police officers, right? This was based on 30 plus years of a Blue Ribbon Task Force and community meetings and new mayors coming in with a plan to fix what was broken. The reality is that this didn't just show up overnight. This is based on 30 years of really hard volunteer community work. And you already have that independence. So if anyone tells you you don't, the voters gave you that independence, and it was intentional because it wasn't my first rodeo. I had been doing this work for a long, long time. And every time we were asked, what do you want as community? What you are putting together is exactly what the community told us we wanted. And so, again, I just want to reinforce, don't get sidetracked. Don't try to solve all the city policing problems with your one commission, because that's not what we hired you to do. But stay laser focused on what we've asked you to do, and make sure you'll be able to defend it when the attacks come, because they will come just like they did for the Charter Commission.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine McDowell here. I'm actually a member of the other subcommittee on officer accountability. And one of the issues we've been looking at there, in addition to the role of the PRB, is the continuing role of internal affairs and how that would, whether we contemplate continued overlap, such as exists in the current system, or whether we need to be more specific about who does what in the upcoming system. And I guess I'd be quite interested in your perspectives on that issue.
I would highly encourage a very severe, strong line between what happens internally and what the new Police Oversight Board will investigate. And honestly, I think the easy way to do it would be a officer-driven complaint against another officer. Let them do that inside. Community complaints, that comes to the Community Oversight Board. I think that would be the easiest, cleanest way to do it. But your committee may have some other ideas. But for me, it's like that would, to me, that's a clean line, right? It's like so there's no mistakes can be made if it's a very clear black and white line.
Yeah, one follow-up to that was just the thought that we set that line, but then allow the officer to elect to have his or her complaint investigated by the Oversight Board instead of Internal Affairs, if they decide they would prefer to have that process in light of potential, a sense of potential, bias or unfairness in the Internal Affairs process.
I would recommend you not give any flexibility at all, because anytime you open a window, which is why it's really, because honestly, I think it could be manipulated in lots of ways, right? I would highly recommend that there's just a really clear line.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, this has gone so fast.
I know. Well, let me be clear. This is not the last time you will get the wisdom of my opinion, because I'm still happy to share my opinion, even if I'm not on the city council. And I look forward to early in the new year coming to a full committee meeting and having this conversation, because you must know how much I love the work that you're doing and how necessary I know it to be, and how committed I am to making sure that we do it right, and that we understand that the political winds have shifted, but not so much that people don't believe that accountability is doable and necessary. And that's why it's important to actually have the structure make sense as compared to trying to get all our needs met through this one temporary commission that will go away after the city council approves your recommendations, right? So I just want to be really clear. I will be available. Samir knows my non-city contact information, and I plan to be scheduled whenever you have whenever you want me in the new year. But I'd love to come early so that you're not wasting time doing research and work on areas that the whole reason to put the Oversight Board in place is because they will have the ability to hire the staff to do the work of so many other issues that will impact constitutional policing in the city of Portland.
Thank you so much. So I am going to move into taking public comment on the issues discussed in this briefing. We ask members of the public to keep their comments on the briefing or questions to the briefers to 2 minutes in length at most, and raise their hand in Zoom if they would like to participate, if they would like to speak. Are there any attendees who would like to raise their hand for public comment? I do not see any. Therefore, let's see. Let's take a 10-minute break. And I want to thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, again, for all of the work that you have done for years upon years, especially your most recent contributions to the city of Portland. We look forward to having you back and deeply appreciate you. Thank you so very much.
And thank you all. And again, I am so grateful that you are volunteering so much time to create a system that will create fairness and justice for all Portlanders. It is a huge task. I don't take it lightly. And I know that you have that huge weight on your shoulder. But no, I will now be on the other side of the table. I'll be a community member, and I'll be coming, and please reach out. Let me know how I can be helpful. My voice is not going to disappear. Enjoy your break, and I'll see you guys. Have a great holiday, and I'll see you next year.
Thank
Be
you
well.
so very much.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you. We will be back at 8:08. Okay, so that was a wonderful discussion this evening. We are going to move into the discussion section around what we just heard. So I would like everyone to be facilitated to make sure that your questions are, or your observations are less than 2 minutes. And that we go ahead and remember that we use a weighted stack here this evening. So we can go into discussion around this. And I see that staff have raised their hand.
Yeah, I think we may have skipped ahead a second here because we're in the report back section.
Oh, I see. Okay. I see up on the screen discussions. So.
Yeah, so sorry about that.
I'm like, I will read what we think. Okay, the structural oversight. We are now going to we'll now move into discussions first by asking for subcommittees to report back on what they're looking into since the last meetings. Those were Debbie with Sophia on policy recommendations development process. Once a recommendation is made to the Bureau or City Council, an obligation to respond, relationship with current PPB, directive review policy, and Sentinel event reviews. So Debbie, if you would like to report what you are finding with Sophia, that would be great.
Okay, so I did a write-up of, kind of some of the policy things that we came across in our research, and that was in the ballot measure and the charter amendment and the IPR code, and copied out all the passages that related to policy. And slow down, wait, stop. And then as far as the policy things go, right, it would be the policy recommendations development process once a recommendation is made, an obligation to respond, and then and I got to the Sentinel event reviews. And then what I did, and I don't know, I just thought I'd start thinking about ideas where we might want to incorporate into our, what is it that group agreements or whatever it's called. Areas of agreement, that's what it's called. So that's what this list is under powers and duties. But below is where I have all of the information that came out of the research, which might be, if we have time later, might be interesting to go through and remind ourselves of what we've come across in the research about how the oversight board might deal with policy. So that's it for my 3 to 5 minute report.
Very good. I believe Commissioner AJ is looking at initiation of policy recommendations from misconduct cases and auditing and collective bargaining.
So I have not had a chance to actually work on it. I've been at a conference and retreat all week and was hoping to sneak out and find some time to work on it, and just haven't had a chance to. But I will I will plan on working on it probably the beginning of next week, and circulate something through email so we can at least have something to review before the next meeting, because I know that there's a long break and I don't want to go that long without the information. So to be continued.
So
Beautiful.
Ajay, can I just make a comment? Ajay, so before you work on yours, look at the one that I put together, because I think I kind of crossed the line a little bit on some of the ones that I did, and that way you won't have to, do the same thing that I, end up doing it twice, where, because if I put it in already, you could just steal it and put it in yours. And yeah, because I think I feel like I strayed a tiny bit from my assignment. Okay, sorry to
Good to know.
interrupt.
I mean, I've no apologies necessary. That's appreciated.
Beautiful. All right, and then we have, I believe Commissioner Sophia is not here this evening. If that is a true statement. And Commissioner Sophia was looking at continual improvement, the ability to originate charter and code recommendations, and the ability to influence federal and state law. And then Commissioner Faith, budget review and Sentinel event reviews. So would like to invite in Commissioner Faith.
I think that I passed Sentinel event reviews to someone
That
else.
was, I did that one.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Thank you.
So don't worry about that one.
Budget, I gave a little sneak peek earlier in my question to Commissioner Hardesty. I've been sort of peeking around the city of Portland to figure out their the PPB's community engagement process for their budget advisory committee. I think the recommendation that I'd like to see in our policy is that the oversight board would have a seat on the budget advisory committee. I know we're moving into discussion. I still feel a little bit muddy in terms of, I still feel muddy. So that's what I've been doing is conversations around budget advisory committees. I also don't know so every city bureau has a budget advisory committee that helps form the budget that each bureau proposes to the mayor for the mayor to determine his final budget or their final budget. And I don't know what that will look like with a new city council structure. So the budget piece feels like one that could have a little bit of a pin in it. And the new oversight board determines what that looks like. That's my update.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Faith. So we're now going to move into having an open discussion. And what do you want to see included in the draft PAC areas of agreement on structural oversight? This is an open discussion, and we ask that you follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times. Please be facilitated, and remember that the commission uses a weighted stack in our discussions. And finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. So I would love to open up for conversations. Commissioner Faith.
I don't know. Thank you. I don't know if I'm the only one struggling, but I'm struggling here. So I'm looking at my fellow committee members of, I think that conversation kind of confused me. Oh, so that's all.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yes. Now's the time to bring it up, right? Just say, I don't know.
Do you mean the conversation we just had with Commissioner Hardesty? Okay, yeah. I think there are a few things that we ended, at least I know I personally, I had, when I did Oakland, that was my area of research for one of the cities I did. And they are actual police commission that does have a lot of say over what their police department does. Whereas what we're getting in Portland, and this is something I had already thought about this before we heard from Commissioner Hardesty, but what we're working on is just the accountability piece. So our board isn't going to be able to tell the police bureau what to do. I mean, really, and where the Oakland Commission, I mean, they can fire the police chief. So, obviously they have a whole lot more authority. And so I think, I got excited when I saw those things when I was studying the Oakland stuff and wrote them down, of course, in my research. But now, on further thought, realized that, that's not Portland's, that's not what Portland's going to be able to do. So we kind of have to filter then now, I think, some of the information we got from the other cities and make sure we're focusing on the stuff that is a fit for our system. So, and what's envisioned in the charter and all the other stuff. So that's just my take on, what we heard from Commissioner Hardesty and kind of what I've already been thinking about.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Staff, welcome in.
Yeah, thank you. I think if there's anything specific that maybe you can provide more clarity on, happy to answer things. But I did want to start by saying, there's some things that are in the charter very explicitly. That was in Charter 210, which were created, that allowed for the oversight board to have certain powers and functions and things like that. There are also items which are in the charter as or explicitly outside of the charter scope. Hiring and firing the police chief is a really good example of that, because the charter defines that as someone else's responsibility. And then beyond that, there's a little bit of gray, which may be contributing to some of the muddiness that at least Co-Chair Faith, you might be feeling. I imagine others might be as well. But within that, there is a clause in terms of what the council has mandated, the city council has mandated the Police Accountability Commission does. And it was put in the chat, I'll put it again in the chat now, but it's that the commission may make recommendations to add duties to the above listed work that they believe are important to the success of the oversight system. That doesn't mean that the city council would necessarily take them, and it certainly doesn't mean that it's one of the core responsibilities of the PAC. This is under optional duties, which is an entirely different section. But in terms of what is allowed to be in the recommendation and the conversation, it's up to the commission to what degree it's an area of focus and things like that. Certainly, Commissioner Hardesty's larger point about the focus area for being, in this subcommittee's case, policy recommendations is the enumerated must include thing from the city charter amendment in 2020. And that includes a couple of the other things that Commissioner Debbie put in her report, the obligation to respond and things like that as well are enumerated in, I think it's 2-1007. And happy to share screen on any of these if they're helpful to do, or anything else to help advance it, including if Commissioner Debbie, if at some point you'd like to go through your document in more detail, that'd be also a possibility too.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Faith.
Thank you, everyone, as I'm struggling and being patient with me. And I'm looking now at section 2-1007, Samir. So I'm looking at section B. The board shall have the authority to make policy and directive recommendations to the PPB and city council. The PPB shall consider and accept or reject all policy or directive recommendations made by the board. If the Portland Police Bureau rejects a policy or directive recommendation, then at the request of the board, city council must consider and vote to accept or reject the policy recommendations received from the board. So we are making a container in which the board can identify the policy recommendations that they would like to make to PPB and or city council. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone for bearing with me. I'm feeling on track.
And if I could add, sorry, Dr. Moses, if it's okay to add one more thing here. This may seem like, well, what it's written in the charter, why does it need to be explained, right? I could see that being a question that people would have, and it's the how of it that's really the important part. And in looking into other cities and how they did it, other jurisdictions, you may have found other things. Additionally, even within the city, for example, PSEP, Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, is one of the current parts of the system that does recommendations to police, and it has methods that it uses, which are worth examining and seeing if at a high level they may be worth warranting. For example, should there be a method for community members to independently put in a recommendation that would be considered, a draft recommendation that would be considered by the Oversight Board to pass on? That's something that you could think about. That's something that some of these groups have done in other jurisdictions and here in the past. So that it's not necessarily at the level of just replacing or rewording or replicating text from the charter, but going deeper in terms of a little bit of the how. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you so much. Commissioner Casey.
So I think this is a question for staff and also for my fellow commissioners, kind of following up on that section we were just looking at and what was just said about how we're going to elaborate on that. Are we really getting into like the nitty gritty of not just like, is there a method for bringing these things before, which I think is a great idea, but are we getting into like, does the board have to recommend things unanimously, or is it a majority vote? What is a quorum for the vote that's being taken? If it's not recommended unanimously, does it go out as a recommendation of the board, or does it go out as a recommendation of the board members who are like, are we really getting into the very like mechanics of how this would happen?
I'm gonna let staff answer that.
Yeah. Again, and this is the cart before the horse consideration that I mentioned during the briefing with Commissioner Hardesty. It's sometimes hard when you're focusing on the how do we do something to talk about the particular makeup of the board, to know that that's not coming up versus talk about that without knowing, well, we need to create a board structure that can do certain tasks, and we haven't figured out what the tasks are yet. So either way, there was going to be this challenge. What the commission did in the I'm on the wrong page here. The commissioner did in the agenda and scope document was to put questions of the structure of the new oversight board into a later phase of work. So as the commission we're in the establishing powers and duties phase right now. Getting into the structure and details is how all of the quorum and things like that are going to get figured out later. So that is coming up, but not quite yet. And I think it's a healthy assumption, although not guaranteed yet, but it's healthy to assume that there's a likelihood that, you know, if that conversation warrants a reconsideration of some of the finer details figured out in this conversation, that there'd be an opportunity to revisit and make sure that the two parts, the form and the function, are in alignment going into the phases beyond that. But generally speaking, that question that you just asked about quorum, and there may be parts that are worth talking about here too, but certainly the very explicit how many members have to vote in what way, that kind of thing is something that the commission put into the next phase.
Thank you, staff. Commissioner Debbie.
And Commissioner Casey, my understanding is that we are supposed to come up with a recommendation that the city attorney can turn into code language. And that code language is what goes to the city council when we're done with our job. So in other words, we need to have enough, we need to come up with enough of the details so that it can be turned into the code language that will be the new code for the new board. And if you look at the code that we have now for the IPR, that kind of gives you an idea of, you know, what kind of stuff we need to cover and in what detail.
Thank you. Commissioner Faith.
Okay, I think I'm here. I'm getting it. So I guess one of the ways in which I'm getting a little tripped up is that we're kind of going into the details around the scope of what policy recommendations could include, rather than what is the process for the new board. At what point do they make a policy recommendation and bring it to PPB? And so for my brain, what I would like to do is to have that piece of conversation is if the four of us subcommittee members are in this new imaginary board and we've listened to complaints, at what point, like what's the lever that we pull to say this, this is a valid complaint. And this also needs policy review from PPB. This is an administrative problem that needs to be reconsidered. And so I'm curious with my colleagues, if that framing sort of makes sense for us to have the conversation maybe first around like what the lever looks like or what the criteria are to determine, hey, this is a policy issue that we need to elevate versus this is this is an individualized complaint. So curious on feedback around that.
Thank you, Commissioner Fate. Commissioner Debbie.
So when I first started attending the Citizen Review Committee meetings, I remember there was kind of a little string of cases that came before on appeal where a police officer would stop a driver and the driver would say, "Why did you pull me over?" And the police officer would say, they didn't say, "Well, I don't have to tell you," but they didn't tell them. And it was perfectly within the policy. They didn't have to tell people, but it made people mad. And it ended up, with conflict that probably was unnecessary. And eventually I think, so when I kept hearing those, you think, now this would be a perfect thing for the Citizen Review Committee to make a policy recommendation on, because they were seeing these things happen over and over again. And maybe they could let officers tell people why they pulled them over or make them tell them why they pulled them over. And I think that policy was eventually changed. I don't think the CRC ever made that recommendation, but that was an example to me of something where you kept seeing, and then there was another one, and I don't remember the details, but it was some kind of thing related to records or something like that. And there was just a clear problem with the whole thing. And that was another thing where, the CRC, and I don't remember if they did it, but you just go, boy, there's something wrong with this. Let's make a recommendation on it. And then there's also the idea, if you look at the document I made, there's also the opportunity to come up with policy recommendations. If you read, if they audit closed investigations, you go through the files and read stuff and you start seeing things, over and over again, you said, let's make a recommendation on that. So there's all sorts of places where it can happen, but that I think we should be including in our recommendations is all the openings for where the oversight board can look at what's happening and then come up with policy recommendations as a result.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Commissioner Casey.
So if I'm understanding what Commissioner Faith was just saying correctly, what we would be sort of talking about in this conversation is what does that process look like? Like if you are, let's say the board is reviewing an individual case and there is a underlying policy issue that seems to come up. Do they discuss it at the end of that meeting? Do they say we're flagging this for sort of a separate process that it goes through? Do we have a monthly meeting of sort of where we discuss larger policy issues? And then kind of what is the workflow of how a sort of someone seeing something in an individual complaint that may be a policy issue turns into eventually a recommendation that comes out of the board and goes to PPB and the city council and everything. Is that sort of what I'm understanding is the conversation that it sounds like could be part of this?
Yes, thank you so much. Staff?
Yeah, so between all the documents, for example, and this is not a suggestion so much as it's an example, I want to be upfront about that. There's several places that have been brought up, one of which is really valuable to source possible recommendations, in terms of the policy. There's the there's 6 that have come up. There's the possibility of it being at the request of PPB through the universal system that is currently in place or some adaptation of that. There's of the oversight board's own volition. There's possibly bringing it in from community members. There's audits of closed cases. There's the policy sourcing from cases. So, and Commissioner Debbie may be able to, Co-Chair Debbie, Commissioner on the other subcommittee may be able to speak to this, but there's a conversation at the Officer Accountability Subcommittee about standardizing the findings in individual cases. And that would be, the individual side would be standardized, but there would also be the possibility of sort of additional findings that can be added to the ones that relate to the individual officer about, for example, if this is a training problem, and that, you know, how does that get sourced in? So the audit would be from the outside in on the closed cases, whereas the case review itself, that process could initiate a policy review too, as per something that has not yet been decided by the other subcommittee, but is under consideration there. And part of the role of this subcommittee would be to say, for example, the oversight board should take in possible policy recommendations from X number of sources and enumerate what those are. That's one example of what could be an area of agreement. Thank you.
Helpful. Thank you so much. Commissioner Casey, do you have any? Okay. Commissioner Debbie and then Commissioner Faith.
So Samir, maybe it would be help if you put up the first page of that document where I came up with a list of ideas of concepts for what we might want to it's the one that's dated like yeah, this is it, I think. Yes, that's it. Thanks.
Oh, and I forgot to mention Sentinel event reviews as the 6th. I mentioned 5 out of 6. Sorry, and now I see it on the page.
Yeah, so I've got you know, it describes under powers and duties items for subcommittee consideration. Then so like that they could make recommendations on policies, practices, directives, and training. Engage in independent analysis of police data related use of force, stop and frisk, and other procedures. You know, it goes on. Can take input from community members on policy matters. Can make policy recommendations based on individual misconduct cases. Review. Make policy. I mean, so you see, it goes on. So of course, all these things got, you know, picked out of all of our research and the current code and. You know, best practices from, you know, from other jurisdictions. So this sort of, I think, captures at least some of the ideas of how the oversight board could be involved in policy related matters based on all sorts of things, you know. They could like review training materials, attend trainings for sworn employees, you know, and then the Sentinel event reviews, which is kind of, you look at something after it happened and have a community group, a group of community members kind of talk about, do like sort of a little investigation of their own, just from a broader level. And but like I think that this came out of this, I found this in Seattle. And so, you know, when they had the you know, remember, what was it, the Capitol Hill, where they had that big occupation? I think they might have done one of these after that to look at the big picture of what happened and what they could be learned, what could be learned from those.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Commissioner Faith.
One, I think maybe process suggestion for our subcommittee is that we develop, along with our areas of agreement, like a flow chart. So here are the things that trigger policy review. Here are the ways it could be triggered, whether that's community input, whether that's a Sentinel review, whether that's a 3-month, like here are all the cases we looked at, et cetera. So like, what are all the points of entry for policy review and then what is actually involved in reviewing policy. And then the next step would be, what is the communication process like between the oversight board and bringing policy recommendations to PPB or subsequently city council? So I think, Debbie, I think many of these things are in your points, in your powers and duties and items for consideration, and more of the details are in other pieces. But I wonder if in between now and our next meeting, if instead of sort of approaching it with like the detailed on issues, if we could approach it with sort of the framing or the workflow of what the policy making process looks like. And we could, you know, I would be happy to like take on the first chunk of like, what are all the points of entry or et cetera, so that I would love to be able to, at the end, you know, have in writing our areas of agreement, but also have a flow chart that someone could look at and say, oh, okay, we've reviewed 6 cases. Now we know we need to look back at them and XYZ, and this triggers a policy recommendation. So that's my thought on kind of homework and next steps. I don't know what others think about that. Also, Commissioner Ajay, I'd love to hear from you if you have any thoughts on sort of this reframing. Are you tracking, and is this making sense in your brain too?
It's processing and trying to figure out the specific of what it looks like to really like design the process is something that I'm also trying to figure out like what that looks like practically, you know. I think I understand the theory of it. The praxis, I'm still sort of working out in my brain, and I don't know if I'm going to have a coherent thought about it tonight. So just to be real. Thanks.
No problem. Commissioner Casey.
I just wanted to sort of volunteer that I imagine a lot of this is going to be stuff that a lot of our staff are going to be hashing out, but I am kind of a process nerd and have done a lot of work in some of my previous positions around sort of setting up programs and processes and things like that. And so if there's any sort of homework or assignments or any way I can be helpful in framing kind of what does the process look like, this is the stuff that I get into. So just want to throw my hat in the ring however I can be useful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Staff put into the chat something more chronological that could look at points of entry as a first step, second step, policy recommendation decisions, third step, post recommendation, flow of recommendations, including obligation to respond. And yay, Commissioner Casey, we love the nerdy process of it all. and appreciate that. So Commissioner Faith, did I see your hand potentially go up before I started reading? So I want to give you the floor if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for putting in this in the chat, staff. Commissioner Debbie, I'm curious from you if this chronological order makes sense and if there's any big sections that we could be potentially missing.
I think it sounds great. I just, when you were talking about that though, this may be Commissioner Casey's forte, but it's not mine. So, you know, I'm better putting stuff on piece of paper like I did, you know, just sort of writing it out as it comes along in words, as opposed to coming up with a schematic to show the process. So I'm glad we have multiple talents in this group, and we've got someone like Commissioner Casey who likes doing that sort of thing and can get, you know, can do a good job at it. So yeah. I think you're right, but we can have, just like we have on the other things, the narrative of the areas of agreement, and then to have a picture of how that works, you know, I think will really help people. So understand, you know, exactly what we have in mind.
Well, and this Okay, I'd like to bring staff into this. Go right ahead.
Yes, sorry. Just wanted to kind of clarify that the old list doesn't, not everything from that list of 9 is included in here, but some of them, and Commissioner Debbie gave a really good example of this earlier. The ability, I think it's in maybe one of the documents at the during the review, the ability to engage in recommendations off cycle of the current director review. The way that that's done is really one sentence. It's that the entity has the ability to do that. So some of these additional tasks, respecting the guidance to sort of focus on the main mission, but also saying in terms of honoring the possible, if the subcommittee and eventually the commission agrees, of course, that any of those are good ideas, it may make sense to simply focus on ensuring that that is a part of the process as opposed to necessarily developing a whole the level of detail that might be necessary to do it in the way that policy recommendations require. So if, for example, ability to recommend that city code be changed, if the subcommittee and the PAC as a whole believe that the new oversight board should have the ability to recommend further changes to city code, that could be a single sentence with maybe a little bit of background information as to why. It doesn't necessarily need the same level of detail as these 3 steps of the chronological points of entry to recommendation decision. So just that's a way to maybe respect the guidance while also honoring, I think, what a few members said about wanting to make sure that the system that's recommended can work once implemented.
So that is helpful, staff. And I think we're having that natural next conversation around next steps. So Commissioner Debbie, I'm welcome in again.
Oh, I just was gonna make the point that, it definitely pays to look at the IPR code as it is right now, because there's a lot of this stuff is in there, and how they framed it is, something to look at and think about if we want to describe it in a similar way.
Okay. So, in terms of next steps, where do you want to go? What is this subcommittee doing over the next 3 to 4 weeks? Where's your destination? Commissioner Faith?
I think it would be great to take those 3 areas that staff had written into the chat and maybe split up those areas. And Commissioner Debbie, it's helpful to know that, like, for your brain, what works is writing it all down in detail. And it sounds like Commissioner Casey, for you, you're like, I got to put this in a structure. So I think that we continue to work on the strengths that we have. So my recommendation would be Commissioner Deb or Co-Chair Debbie, if you could continue to do what you're doing, then we can place all of those into the phases inside the structure. Casey, I would be happy to work on structure with you too. And Ajay, I don't know if there's a particular of those 1 through 3 that seem really interesting to you, or if continuing to kind of look at it narrowly by topic works better for your brain, or you don't even need to answer this right now, and we could kind of talk about homework assignments over email.
Well, and isn't Commissioner Ajay working on some different aspects from that list of 9? Yeah.
So I think Debbie and Ajay will continue to work through those aspects. Myself and Casey can kind of put them in a container or a structured container. I know Sophia is also working on some of those 9, and maybe our next meeting back, Casey and I have put it sort of in chronological order, and if we have brain space, can maybe make a process diagram or something to talk through together. And we can share some iterations of drafts in between now and our meeting on January 12th.
That sounds like a lot of clarity. That it sounds wonderful, Commissioner Faith. Commissioner Debbie.
And Samir, can you remind us about what the rules are around sharing?
Yeah, so there's essentially under guidance we've received from the city attorney's office around public meetings law. You're welcome to use a shared document if it is for a drafting group of in this case, today it's 2 or less people. As of tomorrow, it'll be 3 or less. There's another member of the full commission, Commissioner Angie, joining this subcommittee effective tomorrow. So I'll just skip ahead and say as of tomorrow, up to 3 people can use a shared document to draft something, and that would be essentially developing a proposal for the subcommittee to consider. That's because 3 is not a quorum of the subcommittee. It's unable to make a decision on its own, and therefore it wouldn't be making a decision outside of public meetings. And so you're welcome to use a shared document to collaborate and things like that. You can also meet on your own. What's not allowed is using a shared document as a subcommittee to work on things. So it would need to be kind of more limited that way. And this is, I'm not a lawyer, but paraphrasing oversimplifying what's come from the city attorney's office. So you could put, for example, you could put up to 3 people on points of entry. You could put up to 3 people on any of these things. And I know you've got 6 folks to choose from during that time.
Thank you. Commissioner Debbie.
So I have a question. So, okay, so, I'm working on this document. I'll add more because I remembered about adding information about PCCEP and possibly training advisory council on how they interact with the directives stuff. And so, so say I add another page to this. Can I just send it FYI to the whole subcommittee?
Yeah, the rule is against deliberation. But people can and should circulate, and anything that is circulated to the full subcommittee will also be posted, online so that folks can see it, so that this is not being done, so that the work of the subcommittee and the commission is transparent to the public.
Okay. And then I guess if I sent it out to the whole, all 6 of us, as I get more information in there, then Commissioner Faith and Commissioner Casey, be okay for them then to take that and pull the information out of it and work together on, and one more of us could work in that group too, but the 2 of them could work together in turning it into something that shows more kind of how things will work their way through the process. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right. We have a process. We have procedures. And now we are going to have public comment.
If I could just mention also that we'll although the next meeting is probably around January 12th, it'll be helpful to get this earlier so that it can all be recirculated for everyone to have a chance to read it before the next. So over email, there'll be a timeline once the co-chairs are set on what they'd like it to be. And I'll pass it back to Dr. Moses.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that, staff. So we will now take open public comment on the issues the PAC is discussing, or community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes at length and raise their hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. I do see someone. Commissioner Dan.
Hello, good evening again. I'm Commissioner Dan, now an audience member, but I'm also part of the PAC. So I just want to say, first of all, I'm really glad Commissioner Hardesty mentioned that she and I have these kinds of exchanges all the time. I can recognize that to all of you, it might have seemed very strange, but that's just, we've known each other for a long time, and so that just happened. So apologies for that, but that's the way we talk to each other sometimes. 18 months, she mentioned the 18-month timeline, which the judge said in the document that he signed that would end in the end of October. So again, the city attorney just came to us and asked us about the extension because that is what that document said. So I just hope that we're not going to be discouraged about asking for that extra time. I don't think the judge or anybody thinks that we're not working hard. The charter, I want to remind you, says that the new board can fire the chief. Anybody, any officer or their supervisors can be subjected to the discipline they can impose. So that's for misconduct, not because they don't like their policies. I also, and you recognize this is Commissioner Dan Handelman saying this, I think you might be overthinking this this section. I don't think you need to design every little thing that the board needs to do once they have these policy recommendations to put together. I think that, as Commissioner Iona said, in the IPR code, it even talks about how the chief has to respond within 60 days, or else it goes before city council. That might be something to just carry over. And in the Citizen Review Committee heard a case where a person was left by the side of the road by a police officer in the dark, a young person, and they had nowhere to get home. And they immediately made a policy recommendation not to do that anymore, and the Bureau did it. So saying that you have to have X number of cases or X much time or whatever, sometimes just use common sense to make a policy recommendation and it'll succeed. So I don't know if you need to box in what the new board's going to do to as great an extent as what you're talking about. And I do appreciate that the flow chart that started coming together about where policy recommendations might come from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. I would like to invite Philip, community member Philip.
Hi, this is Philip Chachka. I'm also a member of Portland Cop Watch. During the discussion with Commissioner Hardesty, Catherine McDowell mentioned an issue about internal affairs and those kind of issues. As a community member, if I was filing a complaint, I wouldn't necessarily want internal affairs and the new board to be investigating. I'd prefer one investigator team rather than people coming at you from different groups trying to investigate the issue. And also, since the police accountability, the new board will have authority to discipline. It seems to make sense to me, at least in some cases where their internal complaints might want to be reviewed by the board as well, or at least have the power to do that. Because sometimes if I remember correctly, sometimes the complaints that are taken on by internal affairs are considered internal complaints, but sometimes they actually do have a issue with the member of the public that for some reason, maybe because an officer complained against another officer's misconduct, it never made it to community category, when these should definitely be things that a board should look at. Also for intake for policy suggestions, it would be good to look at internal affairs as well to give recommendations for internal problems that they've been having. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip. Appreciate that. Any other community members? All right, I do not see any others. I am going to move to our conclusion. Garden plot, okay, the conclusion, garden plot recap. Staff, do you have any garden plot recap?
I think the main takeaway from it was, for me, was the places where the two subcommittees might be interacting is something to get a little bit more discussion around, and in particular the officer accountability one, because both in terms of audits and in terms of the findings, recommendations yielding a potential policy implication, just having some clarity so that there's no duplication of work, but also to see how those two can fit together well. And that's the only thing that I had that makes sense as garden plot, I think.
I agree. Thank you so much. Co-chair Debbie? No.
Nope.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. So then I would like us to understand that the Police Accountability Commission now accepts advanced public comment in 3 different ways: from the online web form, voicemail, and postal mail. As a reminder, you can submit all advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission these 3 different ways. Thank you to all of the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you also to our interpreters supporting access to the meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and its subcommittees for all Portlanders. Thank you also to our briefer for coming and spending her time and thoughts with the commission and the public. And finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. Please submit advance public comment prior to future meetings. If you are not already signed up for email updates, please also sign up to receive updates from the PAC. The next meeting of the subcommittee will be in early January. It is now 8:59 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.